I'm truly sorry to share that I'm going through an incredibly challenging and painful situation. Discovering that my long-term partner has been unfaithful has been one of the most difficult experiences I've had to face. To provide some context, my wife and I have been together since high school, dating since 1992, when we were both 17. We're both 45 now, and I'd only ever been with her my entire life. We married at 22, shortly after college, and over the years, we've had 2 wonderful boys. Our marriage has seen its share of ups and downs, like any long-term relationship, but we always managed to pull through, which made the discovery of her affair all the more shocking. It all started back in March 2020, when I first got a sense that something was off. For a couple of months prior, we were in a bit of a funk. I was recovering from reconstructive knee surgery after tearing my ACL in the fall of 2019. At the time, I could only move my knee at about 55% of its normal range. This put a strain on many aspects of our life, since I couldn't perform my usual household duties. My sons did their best to help, but certain tasks only I could do had to be delayed, or my wife had to step in, which she wasn't thrilled about. Our physical intimacy also ground to a halt during this time. It had been slowing down before my injury, but my condition made it come to a complete stop. Meanwhile, my wife, whom I'll call Sue, began spending more time hanging out with coworkers after work. This had been happening between November 2019 and March 2020 quite regularly, and I didn't think much of it. I'd always trusted her completely during the 23 years we'd been together. We both had our own friends and shared mutual ones, and there had never been an issue with spending time apart. Around January of the following year, I started noticing something unusual. Sue began to distance herself from me, which was completely out of character. The hugs and kisses that were a daily part of our relationship suddenly stopped. Even her phone, which she'd always been open about sharing, became a source of secrecy. It was clear that something had changed in our relationship, and I was growing increasingly suspicious. As I reflect on those challenging times, her interactions with me became increasingly snippy, as if she couldn't be bothered with our relationship. It was March and COVID-19 had arrived, resulting in a lockdown in New York City. Both of our careers were deemed essential, so we continued going to work in person. I had just been cleared to return to work after spending 5 months on the shelf due to my knee injury, and I was eager to get back into action. 5 months of knee rehabilitation and inactivity have been driving me crazy. To give you some context, I'm someone who enjoys physical activities, including martial arts, and I typically hit the gym 4 days a week in addition to working on various home projects. Within a week or 2 of the lockdown, my wife informed me that she would need to put in extra hours at work. Given her field, I didn't think much of it initially, assuming it might be an occasional thing. However, it turned out to be every day, and not just for an hour or 2. She would come home 3 or more hours later than usual, head straight to the shower, spend a bit of time with me, a little time with our 17-year-old, while our 22-year-old lived with his girlfriend crosstown, and then go to bed. As I became more mobile and capable of supporting myself on my knee, our physical intimacy gradually resumed. However, it was clear that she wasn't mentally or emotionally present during these moments, and I noticed the disconnect. By early April, the signs of her potential affair were becoming clearer to me. All the classic indicators of infidelity were there, and I decided it was time to find answers. I scoured the internet for information on signs of infidelity in a partner, and she seemed to be ticking all the boxes for such behavior. My search then shifted to how to find concrete proof. I started with her social media accounts. Looking at her Facebook entries from the months prior, everything appeared fairly normal. Pictures of us and our sons, snapshots with her friends, and a few photos from nights out with coworkers. In these pictures, I noticed a recurring presence, a particular guy. In every picture he was in, he seemed uncomfortably close to her, with his arm around her shoulder or his hand on her lower back. It was strange for a guy I had never personally met, and it left a bitter taste in my mouth. But what disturbed me even more was the fact that this man was a friend of hers on Facebook and followed her on Instagram. So I attempted to look up his Facebook account. I was in full-on Batman detective mode at that point. I no longer tried to deny the inevitable. I knew she was cheating on me with this guy. My mission now was to determine how long it had been going on. Over the course of April and May, that's exactly what I did. I never realized the depth of information you could uncover from phone, text, and email records until then. We had a family plan for our cell phones, and I managed to access a substantial amount of data. My wife's data history told a compelling story. The two most frequently contacted numbers from October 2019 to April 2020 were mine, and a number I had never seen before. Care to guess whose number it was? A quick Google search confirmed that it belonged to the guy from the photos who had blocked me on Facebook. We'll call him POS for obvious reasons. Once again, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. However, a lot of their messages and texts were disjointed, which strongly suggested that she had been deleting many of them. While I was convinced she was cheating on me with this guy, nothing in the data could serve as a smoking gun. I needed more evidence. At this point, I confided in my best friend, Oz, about what I had discovered. He asked if I had confronted her with what I knew, and I admitted that I hadn't because I felt it wasn't enough. That's when he told me about an app one could download to supposedly spy on her communications in real time. I won't mention the app's name, as I'm not sure of the rules here. I installed it, synced it with my data plan, and waited. Within days, I finally found it. A text conversation between the two of them discussing how much fun they had the previous night and making plans to meet again that weekend. It was like a gut punch, and there's no understating just how devastating it was. I suppose that moment was my D-Day, and for the next 2 days, I was utterly broken. During those immediate days after D-Day, I actively distanced myself from her, and she could see that I was shaken to my core. She tried to console me and inquire about what was wrong, but I would brush it off and leave her presence. I couldn't even bear to look at her. This was the woman to whom I had given 23 years of my life. Everything I had, and more as a husband, and she had stepped outside our marriage for a guy just 5 years older than our eldest son. By the third day, I was no longer just sad. I was seething with anger. As I continued down this painful path, I contacted Oz to let him know that my suspicion had been confirmed. He asked me if I had confronted her yet, and my answer was a resounding no. Instead, I told him that I wanted payback. I didn't merely want a divorce. I wanted to utterly destroy her. I wanted to leave her life in ruins and make her pay for what she had done. It was a vengeful desire that was going to take time to execute, and I began to devise a plan. In my readings and research on infidelity, I had come across a quote that resonated with me. The enemy of infidelity is unpredictability. That quote became the foundation of my plan. I intended to make her life incredibly difficult, while secretly plotting my exit strategy. Now, it was early June, and I still had the app installed, gathering data every night from their messages. They were conversing as if they were in a full-blown relationship, filled with sexting, romantic exchanges, and even explicit photos. At this point, I had stopped reading their messages and was solely collecting information and cataloging it on my private server. I began acting out of the ordinary. I started going out at odd times, returning home later than she did, and when she asked what I was doing on my phone, I would simply reply with "just stuff" and put my phone away. I had also changed my login information for everything, making sure she couldn't access any of my accounts. Throughout our entire marriage, we had never hidden anything from each other. However, around the time I suspected her affair had started, she had changed her password on Facebook, citing security breaches as the reason. I had confided in Oz about my plan and informed my older sister and 2 of my closest friends about what was happening. These were people I trusted with my life, and I made them swear to secrecy. For context, Oz and I had been friends since childhood, and our friends Joey and Nina had known us since high school. Keep an eye on Nina. She becomes relevant later in the story. July arrived, and my wife was in full-blown paranoia mode. She began texting and calling me much more frequently, asking if I would be home when she got back, inquiring about my whereabouts when I wasn't at home, and wanting to know what I was up to. I could see that the seed of suspicion had taken root in her mind, particularly in her communication with POS. The tension was mounting, and I was keeping my unpredictable plan in motion. The audacity of her actions left me dumbfounded. She was confiding in POS about her doubts and confusion, and even had the nerve to tell him that I was becoming cold and distant. The sheer hypocrisy was staggering. In the midst of these interactions with POS, she even suggested they should stop meeting up at our house because she had no idea if I might just show up, essentially confirming that, yes, she had this guy in our home. Thanks for the confirmation, Sue. What added a delicious layer of irony to the situation was when POS asked her if she was worried about me potentially cheating on her, which actually irritated her. Reading that exchange gave me an immense amount of joy and many laughs. My cheating wife was arguing with her affair partner over whether she was upset that her husband might be cheating on her. Oh, the irony. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't actually hooking up with anyone during this time. When I left the house, it was usually to hang out with Oz or Joey, watch fights, and spend time with my friends, or I'd be at my big sister's house with her and my brother-in-law, who's like an older brother to me. My sister is 52, and her husband is 58. She had told him about my wife's infidelity, but not about my elaborate plan because I couldn't risk him spilling the beans. He tended to be a bit of a blabbermouth. Fast forward to October, and that's when things took a more serious turn. I had been in my Fogg's affair for 3 months now, and Sue was acutely aware of the fact that I was actively pulling away from her. From the day I enacted my plan until the day she confronted me on October 20, 2020, I hadn't even touched her. No hugs, no kisses, no initiation of intimacy, nothing. Not that she needed it, as she was still involved with POS, just at his place or motels. That afternoon, she called me at work, which hadn't been common before all of this began, and asked me to come straight home after work, claiming she had something important to tell me. I'll admit, part of me half believed she might come clean about her infidelity, but of course she didn't. Instead, I got home to her asking if I was unhappy with her. The audacity of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. She pointed out that I had been spending too much time away from home, wasn't showing her affection anymore, and our bed life had completely withered away. Then came the punchline. She actually asked me if I was cheating on her. I couldn't contain my laughter. It wasn't a laugh of disbelief. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated irony. On the surface, it probably seemed like I was laughing off the notion of being unfaithful, but in reality, I was laughing at the sheer absurdity of the situation unfolding before my eyes. I was tearing up, pounding on the floor, laughing hysterically for a good 2 minutes before I managed to compose myself enough to answer. I sat up, looked her in the eyes for the first time in months, shook my head, but didn't provide her with an answer. After that bizarre encounter where my wife accused me of cheating, and I left her question hanging, I stood up, brushed myself off, kissed the top of her head, and went about settling in for the night. Later that night, while I was in my office, curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see what she was telling POS after our strange interaction. So I fired up the app, and to my amusement, they were texting in real time. My wife told POS, "I know he's cheating on me. I asked him tonight, and he literally laughed in my face. He fell on the floor and laughed for like 5 minutes, even though it wasn't really 5 minutes. He doesn't even care how I feel anymore. I don't know how or why, but he's gone. I know I've lost him. This is karma. I know it." As I read those words, a Cheshire cat-like smile must have spread across my face. She was breaking, and it gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. POS tried to console her, saying that if I cared enough for her, she wouldn't have had to turn to him for what I wasn't providing. But the tone of her responses suggested she was beginning to doubt herself. She had the audacity to step outside of our marriage, because I couldn't fulfill my role as a husband due to a legitimate injury and kept the affair going for nearly a year. But the mere thought of losing me to another woman was enough to make her waver. What a hypocritical weakling. While all of this was unfolding, I was also executing the second part of my plan for payback, which involved getting all of my affairs in order financially. In September, I had met with a family attorney to initiate divorce proceedings, armed with a mountain of evidence I had accumulated. New York is an at-fault state for divorce, and the overwhelming proof of Sue's infidelity pretty much guaranteed that I could hold a strong position in a divorce case. My lawyer instructed me to prepare all my financials for potential asset division. I went a step further, secretly transferring all of my money out of our joint account and into my personal one. I also began shopping for an apartment as part of Phase 2. Now, we're in November, and I hadn't changed my behavior. In fact, I had ramped it up. This is where my friend Nana enters the picture. For context, Nina and Sue were never close. I had known Nina since freshman year of high school, 2 years before I met Sue. From the beginning, Sue had always seen Nina as a potential threat because she was my closest female friend. There was always an unspoken, I don't trust her vibe from Sue regarding Nina. Conversely, Nina was never a fan of Sue. Early on in my relationship with Sue, Nina pointed out how Sue seemed to be imposing herself into our circle of friends, while I didn't do the same with Sue's group. This irked Nina because she knew Sue's motivation was jealousy. In Sue's circle, aside from POS, there were no male friends, whereas Nina was the only girl in my group of friends. Nina had been stuck overseas due to the pandemic and finally returned to NYC on November 3. Oz, Joey, and I decided to celebrate her return with a night at Joey's house for dinner and drinks. There were only 5 of us. Oz, Joey, Joey's wife, who was also Nana's sister, Nina, and myself. Nina, with her wicked sense of humor and a hint of mischief, came up with an idea to trigger Sue even further. She suggested that we take some photos in a similar vein to the ones I had discovered of Sue and POS from months ago and post them on my Facebook. It wasn't until the 5th of November that Sue caught wind of it, probably because some friends had noticed my updates and saw how uncomfortably close I appeared to be with Nina. This truly messed with her mind because she still believed I was cheating, and I'm sure she wanted to accuse Nina, but she knew that Nina had been stuck in Europe for most of the year. Still, that didn't stop her from trying to confront me that night, berating me for being so handsy in the photos. This was my golden opportunity to deliver the lead jab for my knockout blow. I casually mentioned, "So what about those pictures with you and POS from last year? He was pretty handsy in them. Did you see me get bent out of shape over it?" She was frozen, like a deer in headlights. It was the first time I had even mentioned the guy's name throughout this entire ordeal. The hamster wheel in her head was spinning as she tried to explain away those pictures. Up until that point, she didn't even know I had seen them, given how infrequently I used Facebook. When I did post something, it was like an event for people, which is why the pictures with Nina specifically garnered so much attention among our circles. She attempted to explain it away with excuses like, "He's that way with everyone. He's just a really friendly guy. I can see how it looks, but there's nothing there," and even offered to delete the pictures. But the pictures weren't what hurt me. What hurt me was the year she had spent having an affair while lying to me about working extra hours and hanging out with friends. My desire to save the marriage had long since died. I had checked out the day I enacted the first phase of my plan. From that night, Sue started being excessively clingy and attentive to me, almost annoyingly so. She tried to initiate affection and intimacy, but I stonewalled her at every opportunity. Meanwhile, I continued to archive everything she was saying to POS. By this point, I had gone emotionally numb. Any desire I might have had to salvage the marriage was dead. I had checked out completely. She confided in POS that I had become even more distant, and she didn't know what to do. She felt like I absolutely hated her, which in truth I did. Then came the bombshell. She said she couldn't see him anymore, The guilt was overwhelming, and she felt like karma was suffocating her. She couldn't risk losing me. She claimed she loved POS deeply, but was still in love with me, and had to save our marriage before losing me. Unfortunately for her, it was too little, too late. POS lost his composure, saying things like, "He doesn't love you the way I love you, and you're making a mistake. You can't just throw me away like this." That text chain marked the end of their communication until about 3 weeks ago. Throughout the remainder of November and into December, Sue was in a state of limbo, trying to gauge where my head was at and still unable to tell if I was actually being unfaithful. Meanwhile, POS was incessantly blowing up her phone daily, but she wasn't responding to him. I would see her checking her phone often, then quickly putting it away. Meanwhile, phase 2 of my plan was officially complete. The divorce papers were done. I had secured a studio apartment in Co-op City, signed a 2-year lease, and all my money was safely tucked away in my personal account. I was ready to deliver my knockout punch. So, we're now at Thanksgiving. My oldest and his girlfriend were hosting a small gathering of our immediate families. It was my oldest, his girlfriend, her parents. She's an only child. Myself, Sue, and our youngest. We had a great night, thanks in no small part to my oldest's talented girlfriend, who's studying to be a chef. She handled all the cooking herself, and let me tell you, the girl can cook. As part of keeping up appearances and not tipping my hand, I initiated affection with Sue several times that evening. Kisses on the cheek, cute little hugs, even wrapping my arms around her from behind. She seemed to revel in it, but little did she know how repulsed I felt. It had been about 2 months since I had last touched her, ever since that night when she confronted me in October. But I had to do it. I couldn't risk the plan, especially not in front of my boys, my oldest's girlfriend, and her parents. It would set off alarm bells. After the festivities, my youngest decided he wanted to stay over with his big brother for the night, so Sue and I headed home. On the drive back, she thanked me for being so good to her and said, "I don't know what you're going through, baby, but I'm here for you." I had to hold back maniacal laughter and simply replied, "I know. I just need time." That night, for the first time realistically since springtime, we had intimacy. I figured, what the heck, with what I'm about to do. I might as well get some action before I delete her from my existence. I won't go into detail, but it wasn't a moment of passionate lovemaking. When I finished, she lay there like a lump of flesh, trying to figure out what had just happened. There was no cuddling or anything. I just got up, showered, and went to sleep in my office. To her confusion, though, I used a condom. It was the first time in 2 decades I had done that. She was definitely perplexed, but she didn't ask any questions. There was no way I was going raw with her, especially knowing that she had been doing so with POS for months at that point. The next day, I checked my handy-dandy spy app, and for the first time in weeks, she had responded to POS. He went full novella on her, professing his love and claiming she deserved better than me. He was only 27, 5 years older than our oldest son, and he was head over heels for a 45-year-old married mother of 2. What a grade A, high-quality simp. She had chosen to blow up our marriage and destroyed the home we'd built for this guy. A pretty boy with a soft side. Ha ha. She responded with pretty much the same thing she had told him before. That she loved him and enjoyed their time together. But she couldn't lose me. I was still the love of her life, but she'd always have a place for him in her heart. She suggested they could still be friends if he chose, but the physical relationship between them was over. Of course, he begged her to see him one last time that week. And yes, she said yes. One more for the road, right? Who was I to say anything? December 4 marked the beginning of Phase 3, the final part of Operation Shinobi Ghost. I had the divorce papers in hand, my new residence was set up, and it was time to slowly start moving my belongings out of the house. But before anything else, I had to break the news to my boys. I called my oldest son over to the house that Friday night and had both of them join me in my office. I didn't go into all the specifics, but I let them know that their mother had been cheating on me for over a year, and I would be filing for divorce soon. This was particularly tough for my 17-year-old because he had experienced his first taste of infidelity when his own girlfriend had cheated on him just 4 months prior. Seeing his heart broken for a second time, this time by the idea that his mother was capable of such actions, hit him hard. My oldest son handled it better and suggested taking his brother in to live with him until things settled down, to which I agreed. We packed up some of his stuff, and he asked me if I was going to be okay. I assured him, "Yes, son, I'm going to be all right. And so are you. We're going to be all right. I promise." And then they were off. The hardest part was now behind me, and it was time to execute the final steps. Over the next few weeks, day by day, my friend Oz helped me get some of my most sensitive belongings out of the house. I provided him with a list of items to grab while Sue and I were at work, and I left him a spare key. These were things that Sue wouldn't notice were missing unless someone told her they were gone. I also got a new phone and phone number, sharing the information only with those who needed to know, including Oz, Joey, Nina, my boys, my big sister, and my mother. All the while, I maintained the charade with Sue, keeping her none the wiser, sprinkling bits and pieces of affection to keep her from suspecting anything. She was still in contact with POS, though not to the extent they had been before. There was still an emotional connection, albeit faint. During this time, I gathered everything, every piece of data I had archived since I started the plan, including call logs, texts, pictures, emails, and more. I made printouts of everything, and it cost me a small fortune in printer ink, paper, binders, and supplies. I carefully cataloged everything in chronological order, from the beginning of the affair until the most recent events, which occurred 2 weeks ago on December 16. In total, I had 14 binders filled with evidence. I then boxed up each binder and gift-wrapped them, addressing them to various people, including my mother. My father had passed away 7 years ago, her parents, her 2 sisters, her brother, her HR department. I forgot to mention that POS worked for the same company, and there were rules against intercompany relationships. Several of her friends, POS, and even POS's parents. I lugged all those boxes to the post office and shipped them out on December 16, with an estimated delivery date between December 22 and 24. Everything was falling perfectly into place as we approached Christmas Eve. I'd been arming the nuke since June, and now it was time to launch it. Sue returned home around her usual time, and I had no idea whether she'd seen POS. I'd stopped tracking her on the app on the 18th, as I felt I had gathered all the information I needed. As was customary, she showered, hung out with me for a bit, and I engaged in a final physical encounter with her on the living room couch. I know I acted like a complete jerk. Then she turned in for the night. In the middle of the night, I woke up and wrapped up one of the 3 remaining binders, with the divorce papers taped to the inside cover. I placed it on my side of the bed, along with a note that said, "Merry Christmas." Next to it, I left my old phone and the business card of my lawyer. I packed up the rest of my most essential belongings, enough to fill 2 backpacks, and left my home, the place I had spent 23 years in, for the last time. To Sue, I vanished entirely off the grid. I was gone, like a shadow ghost. I'd blocked her on Facebook, but for some reason, she hadn't blocked me yet, so I kept an eye on the fallout. It was absolutely glorious. The packages I had sent reached everyone I had intended, and Sue was facing severe consequences. Her youngest sister had a harsh confrontation with her. Both of her parents condemned her actions, and my mother unleashed a verbal tirade on her that was beyond brutal. Even I was taken aback by it. She frantically tried to find out if anyone knew where I was, but those who did were keeping their lips sealed. She desperately attempted to reach me on Facebook, perhaps knowing I might be watching, but I refused to respond without my lawyer present. That would be the next time I would share oxygen with her. Sue had no way to spin the narrative to make me look like the bad guy, because I had exposed her to everyone who mattered in her life. According to a mutual friend who worked in the same company as her, Sue and POS were apparently being put on administrative leave as of tomorrow. So, chances are, she would be entering the new year unemployed. As for the final 2 binders, one had been turned over to my lawyer as my last piece of evidence for the impending divorce, and the last one I had placed in my storage unit to be burned in Joey's fire pit when the divorce was finalized. Do I feel guilty about all this? No, not even in the slightest. I had done right by this woman for 23 years. I had given her the home, family, and life she wanted, and I had loved her unconditionally. I had never faltered, never strayed, and never even entertained the thought of breaking my vows. When an issue came up that I felt was affecting our marriage, I came to her and told her, and we sorted it out as best we could. She opted to find comfort in another man's bed. Rather than come to me and say she was unhappy with our bed life at the time, she decided to step out with a young punk who gave her the tingles. So no, I have no sympathy for what I did, or for her. She can burn in hell for all I care. The most I stand to lose is my house, a car, and maybe a couple of $100 a month in alimony. But seeing as the divorce is filed under the statute of adultery, and NWS is at fault, that might get waived with the insurmountable amount of evidence I've provided. As far as I'm concerned, she's dead to me, and I'm never looking back. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.